Well, this is an incredibly humbling role and seat and place. And as a kid from Hawaii who really cares about this place, there's some powerful messages in what we're going to talk about tonight. And I promise to answer every question that you have. And I'm sure going to be a lot of them. However long it takes until I guess they push us out of here. I don't know how much time we have, Patty, but as unusual as it may seem, I'd like to start the presentation with making a deal. Ranchers like to make deals. And in exchange for me sticking around and answering every possible question that you have, I'd like to ask you for a little bit of your input up front. Is that a deal? I'd like to come around and just ask a few questions. Is that a deal? Does that work? So the question I'd like to ask is, what does it feel like to be a Helco customer? And I'd like 1, 2, maybe 3 words, just quick sentences. Would anybody like to make a comment?
Most expensive in the nation.
Anybody else? Anybody else back here? You guys are back here. Anybody? 1 or 2 words. Hang on.
It hurts. It hurts.
And what was somebody else said?
We have no choice other than Helco. We have no choice. We have a monopoly.
Anybody else? 1, 2 words? Yes.
It should not be a for-profit organization.
It shouldn't be a for-profit. Did you hear that? Let me get the mic too so everybody can hear.
We have no options.
We have no options. Did you hear that? Anybody else?
It feels terrible, and I hope that you can only succeed in extricating us from Helco's inadvertently terrible monopoly.
2 words, 2 or 3 words. Good job. Anybody else?
Between a brick and a rock wall.
Between a brick and a rock wall. I like that. Yes, sir. Let me come over here. Can I get him? Everybody get a fair shot here.
Off-grid incentive.
Off-grid incentive. So they're pushing you to go off the grid. Is anybody off the grid here? Anybody? More and more people seem to be going off the grid, don't they? That's good. Thank you. So we did this exercise this morning with our employees. We meet quarterly with all our employees to talk story about what's happening at the ranch. And it didn't come up, actually, which was interesting. It kind of came up. But Halava. Anybody visited Halava prison by any chance? When I was in high school, we had to do a Scared Straight program, and they sent us to visit some prisoners at Halava. It's pretty scary. And I found it was such an interesting metaphor in terms of being in a place that you're confined and you can't get out of. Isn't that interesting? So as I thought more about this metaphor, a question came to mind. What's our sentence? What's the sentence? 1 year? 5 year? Patty?
Life.
Life. We're on death row. Are we on death row? Does it feel hopeless sometimes? Does it feel helpless? The economy's on death row. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about the ranch and some of the ranching operations. Okay, the impact that it's had on the ranch. So thank you for sharing. And did you get that? Good. So does anybody remember the movie Shawshank Redemption? This is when he disappears at the end. So who here has PV on their house? It's kind of like trying to dig out of prison with a spoon. Isn't it? I mean, it's had an impact, but it's still expensive. It's not cheap. And now you got to get in line, right? Anybody in line waiting to put PV on their house? Are you happy about that? So then we got pickaxe, miners, pick, whatever you want to call it. That's faster, right? So how long would that take you to get out of Halava? I guess it depends on how close you are to the fence. And what about the keys? Well, we've been working for about 2.5 years trying to figure out where the keys are. And Hawaii is a very, very complicated place for a lot of reasons, and a very difficult place to do business for a lot of reasons. But one of them is the way the regulations apply to moving power, moving energy, moving electricity. We're going to talk a little bit about this in some of the analysis, but this is the culmination of 2.5 years of work by the team. The last year, we've had 25 people working for 3 different organizations looking at this question for us. So this is not a small undertaking. It hasn't been cheap. It's been 6-7 months of really, really sustained effort in particular. This is a very, very important milestone for us. And so in the announcement for the meeting that Patty worked so diligently with me getting off, we announced that we would be releasing the study, an abstract of the study. And it's done, but instead of killing a lot of trees and handing you a hard copy, you can download it tomorrow morning, starting at about 8 a.m. on paniolopower.com. Okay? And we're really, really excited to share the results with you. That abstract is 17 pages. It's very, very dense. There's a lot of reference to terminology in there that's pretty complicated. I'm going to try to highlight the key insights here. The work behind that is probably 400 or 500 pages thick. And it's what I would call a utility-grade integrated resource plan. Does anybody know what an integrated resource plan is? An integrated resource plan is generally, at least in this state, a plan that the utility has to prepare every 5 years and submit to the PUC explaining where they're going to get their energy from for the next 5 years and the next 20 years. And so what we decided to do was hire a team that does utility-grade resource plans, and instead of doing it for the utility, do it for us. Do it for you. Okay? And I should say, this is not about me, and this is not about the ranch. Okay? This is about this community. This is about where we have land holdings and we have a direct economic interest in the economy of this region, of this part of the Big Island. Okay? And so you can tell I'm really excited about this, can't you? So anyway, you can download the abstract tomorrow morning as of 8:30. And can I ask, was anybody here in October when I came, by any chance? A handful of people? If you recall, there were 2 major pieces to this effort. There was a regional community grid for Waimea and Kohala. And we also wanted to look at the whole island, because this isn't just about Waimea and Kohala. We need each other, right? We're one island. We're one canoe. And so what we also wanted to do was perform a utility-grade integrated resource plan for the Big Island as though we were the utility, okay? Looking at all the resources that are available to us on this island. Now that's a much, much, much more complicated undertaking, and that's not complete. We need about another 3 to 4, maybe 5 months to complete that, sometime over the summer. But as soon as we have it done, you have my word that we will be back here to share the results of that with you. And that'll be interesting as well, I promise you. So with that, I have a question for you. For those of you that have solar panels on your house, where is this solar panel the most valuable in Hawaii? Not a trick question. Where, what island? What island? Excuse me? This island. Why? Because our power is more expensive. Does that make sense? Is that intuitive? The same solar panel, whether it's on Oahu or Maui or on this island, is actually more valuable on this island. Because the alternative of buying the electricity from the utility is more expensive. This island is the most expensive. I shared this fact last time, and it's stunning, and it's so stunning I have to repeat it. But anybody here watch CNBC? Or the TV news? Oil prices? And you know, oil's kind of been in this 90, 95, 100 range, right? Do you know what oil's delivered to this island, or to Hawaii in general? It's about 25 to 35% more. So the oil that we burn to produce the electricity here is 125 for Helco, 130 across the system, which is not cheap. Which produces very, very expensive electricity. And I won't get into the details here as to what's driving the differences across the islands, but we have expensive electricity. So let's take stock for a second. Cost of living rising faster than incomes. For those of you who were here last time, do you remember I talked about inflation? Food, energy, separate from other kinds of inflation. Consumer durables, washing machines, TVs, jeans. Consumer durable inflation has been really flat the last 5 years. Okay? But food and energy, food's about 15%, 20%. So who here can say their income has grown faster than food and energy the last 5 years? Anybody? Nobody. But if you buy a lot of jeans and washing machines, everything. When was the last time you bought a washing machine? I think maybe one every 15 years or something. Isn't that interesting? Commercial scale agriculture threatened. We're going to talk about this, particularly about the ranch. We've done a lot of analysis. I mentioned this last time I was here, but we've done a lot of analysis. Just want to walk you through that quickly. And then ultimately, community way of life is challenged, right? Is there anybody here who used to have a job in Kona, who lives in Waimea, who no longer has that job, turned it down because the commute is so expensive? At least one. I've heard a number of stories like that, right? So this isn't just about electricity. It's about the total cost of living, right? It's also about fuel, transportation. So let's play psychologist for a second. Anybody here a psychology major from college, by chance? There's been a lot written about this. As humans, we have tendencies. We have predispositions. Right? We have a sort of internal nature. We are risk averse. There's scientific studies that prove this. We don't tend to take risk. We avoid conflict. Does that sound familiar? We tend to avoid conflict. We tend to run and not fight. We also tend to assume others will do something. Does any of this make sense to people? Yeah. So where are we? It's time to lead. And this isn't just the ranch, guys. This is us. This isn't me. This isn't Parker Ranch. It's not any one individual. It's us as a community figuring out for ourselves, educating ourselves on what the options are. Who said options? We don't have any options. We're working on options, okay? So that the community can choose its own destiny. Right? Isn't that part of quality of life? Actually, it's part of sustainability. Part of sustainability is having the options that you had available to your own children. Who here believes right now that the options for our children are going to be more than the options that we had? Matt, the educator, optimistic about the future, building bridges to the future. I love you. Well, you can tell we're passionate about this, so we're excited to share some of these results with you. So let's start with section 1. Chansum. Does that sound familiar? So there's 2 kinds of chansum in Hawaii, having grown up here. Chansum 1 is you're at a high school dance, right? And your buddies are everybody's in a corner, right? Looking across the dance floor. Hey, bro, look at it. Go ask her to dance. Chansum, right? Then there's the other extreme of chansum, okay? Pipeline, 20 feet. Glassy, but the pitch is steep, right? Who here has surfed pipeline? Anybody? So I grew up on Oahu, right? Surfed Southside, surfed town, hit Haleiwa. Pipe, I'm regular, right? So backside pipe, I went out twice, and I can tell the truth, I didn't go for it. Seriously, I mean, big surf is scary, right? So those are the extremes of chansum. Okay, so let's jump in. Taking chances and calculating risk is part of what we do as ranchers, right? We manage risk. We do deals. We're constantly making trades, right? What's the revenue line look like? What's the expense line look like? What's the predictability of that? I think we're at a time where we need to be taking more risk than we're used to taking, which can be a really uncomfortable place. But if we're educated and we're smart and we're working with people that support us and understand what we're trying to accomplish, the risk comes down. It's a little easier to take risk when you got a strong team behind you. You've seen this slide before. Essentially, the burden of a cattle operation above and beyond, this is for our Mauna Kea lands, above and beyond what it would take if we were a mainland ranch, because the water we have to pump for half the ranch. What this basically says is half of Parker Ranch cannot compete and achieve a market return with mainland ranches. Okay? So I'm the CEO, so what do? Do you idle half the ranch? You say, hey, I just can't compete. That's tough luck. I got cowboys in the back here. I got guys that have spent 15, 20, 25 years working for the ranch. They have a lifestyle. They have families to feed, right? So what we decided to do is make energy our highest strategic priority. This is the analysis that I mentioned before. This is the legacy cow-calf operation. This is what's called the Monte Carlo simulation. We took the results, ran it against 5-year, 10-year histories, and basically what it says is there's a tipping point at $100, about $90 to $100 a barrel. What happens when oil goes up? Profitability of the ranch really precipitously declines, okay? So I've been quoted for saying the relationship between the ranch and Mother Nature was disrupted because of the high price of oil and electricity. This is it, okay? The numbers prove it out. So people have asked me, why are we moving toward grass-fed? The tipping point moves out. We're still actually exposed to oil and electricity. But we really, really, really believe that a local beef cattle business will produce a more predictable return for the capital that's invested in that business. And for those of you that are managing your IRAs and your retirements, rule number 1 in investing, risk and volatility go hand in hand. If you just look at return, you might be taking way too much risk in your portfolio, right? So you might be happier with an 8% return, 6% return, if that's a pretty steady return, instead of a 15% return or 20% return that's completely unpredictable, that you just don't know. No bulai. So, Dr. Bergen's here. Dr. Bergen. So I've been at the ranch 3 years. So my lifetime, that's a long period of time. And I know you know a lot about history of Parker Ranch, but you know, I think I've acquired some knowledge on the ranch and history. So what do you think? You think I know more about the ranch than you? Bulai, right? So no bulai. So our goal here is to be open with you. We're not hiding anything, okay? So I just want to make that clear. When we show you these portfolios, these generation portfolios, right? That is the data. That is what it is. There's 40 different generation portfolios, not one or two. But we looked at a whole combination of what you can do with conventional technology, okay? So I just want to make that clear. So Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. Has anybody heard of that by any chance? So Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative was an initiative that was kicked off about 5 or 6 years ago to look at large-scale renewables in the state and what benefit that could provide. And the real focus was trying to wean us off oil, right? Diversify away from fossil fuels. And so this slide is the key slide in thousands of documents. It could take you a year to read it. But this one slide basically says, through a combination of renewable investments, you could wean the state off of oil. And the higher the price of oil goes, the better you're off by getting away from that stuff, right? By having more renewables. So it makes sense. The sort of embedded return on renewables is higher as oil prices go up. The other thing this says is the break even is at $65 to $85 a barrel. What that means is, it begs the question, should we have invested, if we had, in a lot of really large-scale renewables? And if oil stays above 85, it was a good decision. But if oil dropped below 65 and stayed there, it wasn't a good decision. Does anybody here think that oil is going to drop below 65 and stay there for the next 20 years? Anybody? No, I don't think so. So we're back to this other slide. I shared this before. The oil delivered is $125 to $130 a barrel. So at $130 a barrel, this is where we are. $12 billion. That number is the present value of the wealth that would stay in Hawaii if we had adopted all those projects. And I'm not advocating for any particular project. I'm just saying this is the analysis that was done. Is $12 billion a lot of money? $12 billion is a lot of money. Well, there's an interesting way to measure $12 billion. Let's measure it against the assets of the utility. The assets of HECO, MECO, and HELCO combined are about $4 billion, plus or minus a couple $100 million, depending on when you sort of look at this in point in time. Does that math make sense? 12 minus 4 equals 8. Is this funny? Is this strange to anybody? Anybody have a thesis, a theory on this? Risk resistance. Avoiding adopting some of these things, maybe? It kind of feels that way, doesn't it? It may or may not be true, I don't know, but what this says is there's $8 billion that we're not getting. This is leaving the state. This is flowing through your pockets every day, okay? Just for electricity. So Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative was the deal that the utility did. So it talks about meeting renewable portfolio targets. Has anybody heard of that before? RPS targets, right? There's these targets, 25, 30, 35%, right? That 8 billion, that 12 billion, is a function of hitting those targets. They modeled what renewable projects you'd have to do to try to achieve those targets. What we've learned recently is there's actually studies that show we can lower rates by pursuing more renewables than the targets themselves. So it suggests that the targets were low. So then what does that mean? That means this number is understated, okay? So it's not 8 billion, it's actually more than that. Isn't that interesting? You like sample. Anybody remember that? I remember that as a kid in high school. Yeah? A few of you? Anybody else? So you like sample has a couple of different meanings. Richard probably knows. I had two friends in high school. They didn't go by their given names. They went by nicknames. One was Grasshopper, and it's true. And the other one was Mantis, and they were best friends. And they always had a lot of money, and they drove really fast bugs. Okay? And they imported a lot of agricultural product from the Big Island, I think. And these were friends, and my older brother had a Camaro, a souped-up Camaro. And we kind of knew each other, and just like you know each other in high school, you pull up at a street light, right, next to one of your buds, roll down the window, hey, bro, you like shampoo? Okay? This is, the message here is we really want to soup up our bug, okay? We want to build something that's unique and different and competitive, right? And kind of show maybe the rest of the island that there's a model that's an alternative model, right? And again, this isn't just about Parker Ranch and Kohala. I said in the last meeting, if anybody remembers, if we develop a game plan that works for this part of the island, especially for rural communities, ranching, farming, okay? We're going to share that game plan with other rural communities in Hawaii, okay? Open book. Because this is just too important, okay? So now I'm going to get into some of the Siemens work, and this is in the abstract. You'll see a lot of this in the write-up. Again, you can download this tomorrow. The Siemens team modeled 40 separate options based on 4 generation portfolios, 5 future scenarios, and 2 distribution grid configurations. Let me just focus on the last item, distribution grid configurations. We looked at 2 basic ways to move the power. Do you remember at the beginning of the presentation I referred to moving power? Configuration number 1 was using Helco's lines under what's referred to in the industry as sort of a tariff structure, where you sort of pay a toll to move power down the lines, okay? And that practice, that industry practice, is done in many, many markets in the United States. So Siemens calculated, using rate case data from Helco, what that tariff rate would look like, using Helco lines, but generation from elsewhere, not Helco generation. Okay, so that was distribution grid configuration 1. Configuration 2 was, what if we don't use Helco's lines? What if we build our own lines? What if we build our own lines? I love that. Booz Allen evaluated 48 potential reservoir sites for pumped hydro storage, 49 different project configurations, the most detailed pumped hydro storage study probably ever done on the Big Island. Does you understand what pumped hydro is? You use cheap energy sometimes to move water uphill, and then as it comes down through the pipeline, it spins turbines inside the pipeline, and as those turbines spin, as the water's rushing through it, that generates electricity. So we've looked at 48 different locations, okay, around the ranch. Key findings. The portfolios that are most economic range from those that create energy districts that utilize the existing Helco distribution system to supply electricity to existing customers from new generation sources and enhance the capacity and resilience of the existing energy infrastructure, to others that involve construction of a completely new electric distribution system or microgrid added to an energy district that could operate independent of the existing utilities distribution system. Does that make sense? We can beat Helco's rates, whether we use their lines or we build our own. That's what that says. Do I need to repeat that? Does that make sense? We can beat Helco's rates. That's the headline, okay? So key project objectives. Number 1 was to lower the price of electricity. No, I'm serious. This is actually kind of funny, because the work that the utility did for their resource plan was designed to meet those renewable portfolio targets primarily, right? I mentioned those RPS targets. What we did is say, let's look at if we could lower electricity first, and then let's compare those portfolios to how much. I mean, we pushed high penetration renewables into these portfolios too, but that wasn't the primary objective. The primary objective was, can we lower the price of electricity? So, has anybody heard the ads that Helco's had on the radio recently? high renewables. They sort of, have you heard these radio ads? Ask Helco the next time you see them, what have you done to lower our electricity rates? That's the question to ask, isn't it? What have you done to lower our electricity rates? 2, preserve electrical system reliability and power quality. 3, preservation of cultural values and rural way of life. Who here believes in that? Home rule, okay? Control your own destiny. Self-reliance. Leslie? Self-reliance. So we've moved from what I would call self-advocacy, which you try to teach your kids, right? Look out for yourself. Take care of your family. Take care of yourself. We now have to move, I think, to self-reliance. We have to look at the resources that we have control over and how can we cultivate those and push the uncertainty that we're exposed to out of our lives. The stuff that's unpredictable, if we can. And make this a more predictable outcome for our families, for our kids, for the school. Minimize environmental impact and support self-reliance and self-sufficiency. So when you do a utility grade resource plan, one of the things you do is you measure the performance of your generation portfolios against external economic scenarios. High oil, low oil, okay? Drought, a lot of rain, drought. We measured actually against water resources too. So we had a variety of external scenarios that we measured against, which you can read in detail in the abstract to see how they would perform. And these are the results. Status quo. This is right out of Helco's integrated resource plan submitted to the PUC last year. So this is kind of the do nothing, I guess, or rely on Helco. Okay? And then these are all the portfolios. And I'm not going to get into the details here. You can read it in the abstract, okay? But that dotted line across the top, average status quo across all scenarios. Right? So that's the average of the status quo. So we want to measure these portfolios against that dotted line. And so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, that beat it materially in every economic environment that we can predict, right? Each one of these sleeves, these columns, is the economic scenario, right? Improve the predictability of the outcomes. This is good news. This is great news, okay? Now, the other thing I would say is the blue, I guess it's blue, is that blue? Is the generation cost, okay? The red or the rust is the T&D charge, okay? So for this to happen, we need to be able to use Helco's lines. It's a little more expensive to build your own lines. 2 to 6%, I think is what the study says. But we could still beat Helco's rates even if we build our own lines. So again, that's good news. So what do the results tell us? Waimea could be a world-class case study for a sustainable community with a microgrid that lowers rates and increases renewable energy penetration. That's good news. So, I got to tell you, 2 years ago, I didn't know that was going to be the result. Right? Think about it. I was sitting here with our team looking around, looking at Waimea. I was like, look at all this wind. Look at all the renewable energy, the potential we have here. Do you think we could do something, guys? You remember that? Everybody kind of said, I don't know. What do you think? Yeah, I'm just a rancher worried about my community. I'm not an energy expert. I mean, my background's not in ranching. But the more and more and more and more that we studied and studied and studied and learned and learned and learned, and we're curious, we just continued to ask questions. We were obsessed. There's about 2 or 3 of us, Jonathan in particular, who's here, Jonathan Mitchell, who is part of the team. So I have to tell a story. So Jonathan interned at Apple Computer between his first and second years of business school, and he decided to come work for Parker Ranch instead. How's that? So here we are. We've spent a lot of money. This has not been cheap, right? This is at our expense. This is the ranch and the beneficiaries, let's say. The beneficiaries have shared in this. So where are we at now? We have to measure the resources, right? We've already been measuring some of the resources. We've had some equipment out, especially for the wind. Secure an operating partner. So this is the company that would run the assets, would have the team of people that actually manage the assets. Attract the necessary capital. So I got to get a pitch book together with all this stuff and hit the road, right? And my guess is half my time for the next 6 months is going to be hitting the road on the mainland, raising capital. And that's okay, because this is important. The capital budget for the microgrid is $300 million. Okay, so this isn't cheap. The average annual capital budget that Helco spends, I think, is about 40 million, something like that. So we're talking about spending 300 million. But you spend 300 million, but your rates go down. Isn't that interesting? You spend 300 million, but your rates go down. Why? Because we're taking oil out of the portfolio as much as we can. Attract the regulatory support. This is going to take a world-class regulatory team of experts, okay? And we're working on assembling this team. And it's going to be people here in Hawaii that have experience in Hawaii, but it's going to be people that have experience in other markets where these kinds of things have been done in the United States. Last, evaluate impacts in value for the entire island. So remember early on in the presentation, I talked about there being 2 major pieces to this project. Phase 1 was Waimea, Greater Waimea Kohala Microgrid. Phase 2 was island-wide, looking at the resource mix island-wide, whether we could actually help that too. That project's going to take another 90 to 120 days. And it'll be interesting to see what those results look like. So my last slide, I was sitting around Saturday afternoon, obsessed with this stuff, trying to figure out where are we going from here, right? If Waimea can do this, what does this mean? If these numbers, if the math makes sense, and technically we could do this, what does this mean? And it may mean that as a community, so what this says is we move from status quo to individual self-advocacy, collective self-reliance, community solutions, where we're all together. It may mean that we as one, and I know we are not one community, but I think this is a unique opportunity for us to act as one community. Right? Different. To advocate for ourselves for a solution that we want, not a solution that somebody tells us is best for us. Right? So a really interesting question is if you go back to that slide, you have the 12 billion, the 4 billion, and the 8 billion. That's just the direct economic benefit from lower rates, from that island-wide, those statewide Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. What would you do if you had more money in your pocket? What would you do?
And food cost less?
You'd pay for food. You'd help Tutu out with her prescription meds, right? Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
The cost of food would go down because they would be carrying less cost.
Right. So there'd be a, do you know what that's called in economics? A multiplier effect, right? Does anybody take economics? A multiplier effect. What that means is there's a direct benefit, but there's a series of indirect benefits. I wonder what the indirect benefits of having $8 billion in our pockets would be. Would that be another billion? Would it be another 5 billion? Isn't that an interesting question? So there's actually a social value to doing these things, not just a direct economic value, not just, I don't have to rent anymore, I can actually buy, right? That's the, but the compounded benefit of these things. And so we're actually interested to know that. So we're actually going to look at that too.